everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sandra Garcia. I'm a reporter with the New York Times. I am here with Emmy Award-winning, MTV Award-winning, former co-founder and president of Me Too, the vertical for young Latinos and American-born Latinos as well, Beatriz, and president of SUMA Wealth, Beatriz Acevedo. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. Very nice to meet you, Sandra, and very nice to virtually somehow meet the rest of everyone who's joining us today. And that was such a powerful session with Natalie. I was so pumped up that I'm feeling very inspired for this fireside chat.
All right. I mean, she was so full of energy, and all of those facts were just, revving us up. We're like, wait, hold on. How much does a Latina make?
Yeah. I know. It's crazy. I didn't know. I was in that stat of not knowing about Latina equal pay till maybe 4 or 5 years ago when Mina Harris was starting this campaign of Phenomenally Women, and she was doing it for every single cohort every time it was the anniversary. And she came to me and said, do you want to partner and bring awareness to Latina equal pay? And that was the first time. And I was like, how is this possible? And it mortified me even more, when Natalie said this, and I learned about it too, that no matter, the bigger your education and the more you advance, yes, the wider the gap gets. And I was just like, this is ridiculous. So I started, obviously, when she said you need people at the top to say this is not gonna fly, I was that day right at Me Too, I was like, hey, we can't be paying women less, do we? Like, can I look at everybody, at the director level, coordinator, whatever it is I want to look? And there were some disparities. Like, I have to agree, but not that we would ever say we're going to pay the Latinas less than the men, because our entire company was about advancing Latinos in our community. But what I saw, because I started to do these reviews myself and these promotions myself, were that the women, and I know a lot of people disagree with this because they're like, this is systemic racism and it shouldn't be on the Latinas negotiating. And I absolutely agree with that. But it was interesting to see how culturally there's something in us, and I'm included in that group, where we're mortified to negotiate. And I would see the women at Me Too, the majority, there were a few outliers, but the majority were just very grateful for the opportunity, right? They would just be like, oh my gosh, I'm so great. I would tell her, listen, you're going to be promoted to vice president, and maybe you're going to get an increase of something that wasn't market norm, just to test. And they would immediately be thankful. We're so grateful, you won't regret. And I was like, no, you need to ask me, is this what a vice president makes? What else could I get in my comp package? So I use it as a training opportunity, but it really opened my eyes. And now, as uncomfortable as I get doing my own negotiations for my own salaries or equity, it's very uncomfortable place to be as a Latina. And I'm an immigrant Latina. So I grew up with hearing my mom and my grandma say, calladita te ves más bonita, right? Where it is not your place to be negotiating and, to have a big personality and to fight for what you're worth, because you're taught also as an immigrant to keep your head down, don't make any waves, be grateful for what you're given and being in this country, but it's not serving our generation now, when we see that the pay gap is at $1.1 million. So it's crazy that even with that, Latinas are thriving, as we saw in the numbers, but imagine what Latinas could be or reach if we supported them.
There's definitely a stifling of the community, but before we get started, I'd like to ask you to tell me a little bit about your story. How did you get started, and how did you start and figure out that this is where you wanted to be as president of SUMA Wealth?
Yeah, so I never thought of myself as being an entrepreneur. I became an entrepreneur the day I lost my job. So again, I'm part of that data of the immigrant people who are like, okay, well, I don't have a job. I need to start something on my own. But when I look back into being a kid, I think I did have that entrepreneurial spirit in me. My parents, when they have family around, I used to do any kind of performance, whether it was gymnastics or theater or anything. And then I would run to the kitchen and get this little container where my mom would put the tortillas, and I would pass it around, to family members for like donations. So there I was getting training on my seed funding. So I do think I had that entrepreneurial spirit, but I started in radio when I was a kid, when I was pretty young. And then I started to do television, and I had a very comfortable job at a TV network. And I never thought of myself doing anything else but hosting my TV shows, writing, producing, until the day that I got this fax. I'm totally dating myself. A lot of people here don't even probably know what a fax is. But I got this fax from some coordinator person I'd never met in my life saying all my shows were canceled. This is after I had won the only Emmys that Mexico had ever won as a country. You know, the ratings to all my shows were high, and that's a very different story. But nevertheless, they did not like women. At that time, they would say if you got, you know, sort of a bit powerful, they would put you in something they call the refrigerator to cool you off. So that I was part of those women put in the refrigerator. Now that I, you know, see the presidents who were presidents back then of these networks that have moved on to do other things, I have nothing but to be grateful to them, because if it wasn't because of that, you know, I don't know how long my career would have been, you know, in a miniskirt presenting music videos, where today I found my passion and my calling in opening as many doors as I can possibly can to my Latino, Latina, Latinx community here in the US. So grateful for that moment. But, you know, my career as an entrepreneur was nothing that I planned, no big insight that I had. It was just a necessity. I needed to pay for my rent. And, you know, I started my own company, which I was the only person in my company in my apartment. So, you know, the rest, I guess, is history. You see an opportunity. Clearly, our demo is so underserved that not just in media, but in many other areas, you know, there's so much to fill there. And I was lucky to be able to do that in my previous life as a TV producer. And then after that, as a founder of a tech media company with Me Too, and now with SUMA Wealth, which is, you know, at the intersection of entertainment and finance. I really, really believe that all these stats that we hear about, whether it's representation in media, whether it's entrepreneurship and how we get very little funding, if we had control of our economic power, we could solve for that. So we have to get started now. And I love the stats of how we have the largest economic power and how we buy the most, but we are also the community that saves the least, right? So it's great that we have the buying power, but I would love to see a stat that says that we also are making incredible investments into building wealth for our families and generational wealth. So I'm excited to use the playbook that I have of building community via content that is in culture, that it's fun, that it's easy to digest, and now bring it to the intersection of finance with SUMA Wealth.
That's wonderful. I really liked what you said. You became an entrepreneur the day you were fired, because
yes.
If there's one thing I know about Latinas and Latinos is we're going to get to work. You don't have to tell us when or where we're going to get work. How have skills that you've learned in your extremely long and diverse career, how have those skills that you have learned as an entrepreneur strengthened other areas of your life?
Yeah, I think it goes all the time is both, right? As a person, what you learn, you use in your entrepreneurial journey and vice versa. But I would say one that is very, very important. And when people say, usually I get the question in a way that is, what is the biggest regret, right? Or what is the biggest learning, or what's the biggest failure that you had as an entrepreneur? And I think one thing that sums it up is that throughout my entire career, I always trusted myself a lot. I trusted my gut a lot. When I launched Me Too, you know, I was coming into a world that I didn't know. I had never raised capital. I didn't know what VC meant. I didn't know what a Series A was. I had to Google all these terms. It was crazy. And as you know, Latinas only get 0.5% of that funding when it comes to venture. So I had no idea. And, you know, I was very lucky to be one of the few Latinas to raise over $50 million for my previous company, but that comes with a price. I would view all these non-diverse men who were my investors and on my board around me as the experts, right? And although my gut would tell me this is wrong, or I wanted to make a different decision, I would defer. And that was the first time that I just did not trust myself enough, thinking, well, what do I know, right? Like, I don't know, like, I'm just like some girl from Tijuana and I'm just like an immigrant. I don't know anything about venture. I don't know anything. So although it felt wrong, I would say yes. Or although somebody might make a comment on a board meeting, like, oh, that's a really horrible idea. You know, I would feel so small, so little in a corner that I'm like, oh my gosh, like I should just be quiet. And looking back at it, the ideas, my gut, everything was right, right? Everything was right back then. And it's not a regret because it's a learning, but it's definitely a learning that I use in my personal and now my professional life. Trust the data, trust the expert, trust the iconic investors you might have that have sold a lot of companies for billions, but trust yourself. Like, you know really more than you think you do. So I think that is one of the biggest ones. Another one is to really be flexible, right? Like, there's no perfect road to anything in life. It's always, you know, ups and downs and sides. And so to breathe through that. I am unfortunately a Virgo type A personality, you know, a girl who wanted to always excel and, you know, get A pluses. And that is really hard if you don't learn early on in life that that is not what life is going to be. So that is another big learning that I've had to be like, it's okay to not be the best all the time. It's okay to be rejected. It's okay. And it doesn't make you any less. So I think to know that, to be flexible, to, you know, to keep fighting for what you believe in, that was another really important thing. And tied to that, that perfection just doesn't exist, right? Whether it's in your personal life or in business, and just make peace with that. I would say those are my top, my top learnings.
That's incredible that you learned more so how to trust your gut. You know, you didn't shy away from it, even though you had that feeling initially, sort of like, they're the experts, it's okay, but you leaned into your own gut, and that's incredible.
Well, now I lean into my gut. At the moment, I didn't, you know, and that was the one thing that I'm like, I should have, right? Like, when you think about, you know, should we have done something that was direct to consumer? 100%. But at the time, you know, some other people thought that was a dumb idea. Should we have done everything that now every single successful digital media company does? You know, maybe we could have done it earlier. Maybe we could, and that was okay. But, you know, now when I feel that something is not right, even if I might not be the expert, I might not be the iconic person in the room, I might not be the one who has sold more companies than these men, I'm still going to raise my hand and say that does not feel right for me. And I really don't want to take that path. And it's, you know, it takes courage to do that, because you're like, oh my gosh, like, you know, you're there as the only one, but your gut matters, you know, your instinct really matters. So that's a big learning.
How do you think that we can create or expand currently existing Latina and Latino networks in order to sort of embrace Latina entrepreneurs and Latinos, Latin entrepreneurs?
Exactly. We'll include them. Listen, for me, I think that it's in defense of our community, you know, there's been a lot of scarcity when it comes to opportunities, as we've heard today and as we know from all the data. So I think, you know, expanding the network, opening the doors to the next generations that come right after us is critical, right? We do need to be, like we heard earlier, in those positions of power. We need to be those CEOs. We need to be in the C-suites, because that's how we advance our community. I think, unfortunately, because there's been so much scarcity when it comes to our own people leading in those roles, it's older generations, for the most part, I'm hopeful in the new generations, have been very protective of the few that get to be in those positions of power. They tend to not be very generous when it comes to opening doors to the next generation. And I'm not saying it's everybody, but it's just, you know, I've heard a lot of people say, like, why would you open door for, you know, they could take your place, they could take your board role, they could and I'm never afraid of somebody who's younger, smarter, more prepared, because I really, really believe that there's room for more than one of us whenever we are. So for me, and I know for a lot of my colleagues, particularly Latinas, because there's a very big group of Latinas that are incredibly successful, it is our mission to open as many doors as we can and to really eradicate that scarcity mentality, because until there is many more of us in positions of power, change is not going to come fast enough. Change will come by default, right? When you look at the numbers and you see that 1 every 2 kids today being born New York, in California, or Latinos, it's inevitable that by default, we will fill those roles, but it's going to take a long time. We need to be much more intentional now on how we open those doors and how we give ourselves that support as a community. I'm a very big believer in collective impact. 1 + 1 is always more than 2, right? And that impact that I think we can learn from other cohorts as a community is critical that we change that mindset in the younger generation. So for any Latina out there or Latino in a position of privilege, and I know it's few because the numbers say it, who are the CEOs, who are the people in boards, who are the people running funds, it's very, very few, right? It's the 1%, 0.5%. It is our responsibility to be those leaders of change. It is our responsibility to bring in as many Latinos as we possibly can into any room that we have access to. I think that is, that should be our goal, and that's how we can create very quick change in our community.
And how do you think that the past generation's actions when it comes to networking affects us today?
Well, listen, there's so much, talking earlier about like the immigrant mentality, right? Like you grow up with this, like being quiet, you know, especially for women, right? Being quiet, being grateful, not that being grateful is not a fantastic quality to have as a human being, but being vocal is something that we really need to instill in the next generations. Maybe when you're an immigrant, maybe when you, want to keep a low profile in a new country, maybe that was serving to those generations. To our generation today, that is not serving, right? To be invisible is not serving. It breaks my heart, and I'm a very big advocate on media representation for this matter. And this is a big part of why I wanted, Me Too at the time that we funded it, to be that source of pride and community for this US-born, English-dominant generation that for the most part feels completely ignored, right? When people think about Latinos, Hispanics, they think, okay, they're immigrants, they speak Spanish, they watch soap operas, I'm gonna find them on Univision. And that is one part of the demographic that today is only 19% of the US of the Latinos in the US. The majority are the US born. Growth, as we know, is not coming from immigration, it's coming from nativity. So what happens to the majority that are US born, that are proud Latinos, that speak English, but are very connected to the roots and to their culture? They just feel absolutely ignored. And brands and media companies think that because they speak English, because they're consuming content on digital, they are reaching them through general market. And my answer to them is always like, you are reaching them, but you're not touching them. It's a very big differentiator, right? One is qualitative and one is quantitative. Very, very different to make you feel that you belong. And that is a human need, right? In a pyramid of human needs of shelter and food, belonging is a really important thing. And that's, I think, what I did very well in my previous company, where Latinos felt like there was a place where they belonged. So today, when you think about these kids that are 50% being born here, the majority, now there are no minorities anymore when it comes to Gen Alpha. So you're the majority in a country, but you're completely erased. You're only represented 3% in media, and you're 50% of these demographic being born. And the 3% is so stereotypical. It's not even that we get the 3% in a positive way. We get the 3% in a stereotypical way. It not only affects how others perceive us, it affects how our own kids perceive themselves. How much could they become? How big can they dream? So media matters, seeing people that you can aspire to be like. Of course, there's a lot of people that didn't have a role model and they still made it. But again, it's a 0.5%. We can't let that happen. We need to accelerate that. So for me, thinking about our youth, which is no longer minority, which that is exciting, but in the other heights, how are we giving that sense of pride of who they are, like how we were so pumped up by Natalie in the previous presentation of Latinas are so incredible. I do this with my kids all the time. They roll their eyes, they're now 15, they're twins, and they know every piece of data of why they are more and not less, right? But we have to almost give it to them in the water that they're drinking, because we need them to go into the world with that sense of swagger and of confidence, because we know media is not doing it, right? And it's really sad, and I hope that changes. And there's a lot of us involved in so many initiatives to try to change that, but that's not going to be an overnight change. So I think it's on us as moms, parents, tias, tios, whoever it is that we are, that at least the younger generation, we pump them up with this data. We pump them up with how valuable they are and how they are going to be leading this country moving forward.
Right. One final question. If you could define the American dream, what it means to you, and is it something that Latinas today and Latinos, is it something that we can still aspire to given the current climate?
I mean, for me, it's equal opportunity, right? Like, we come from countries where opportunity wasn't as easily available to us, but we also think that being here does not guarantee equal opportunity. So is that dream attainable? Sure. Will Latinas, particularly Latinas and Latinos, but I will any day place my bet on any Latina, right? Like that hustle, that resiliency, like it's just something Latinas have in them, right? In their DNA. So will Latinas succeed? 100%. Can we help accelerate that? 100%. So my focus, even with this company that I'm launching and with all of the philanthropy that I do when it comes to entrepreneurship, media representation, is placing a bet on leveling Latinas and Latinos up to starting the race at the same place as everyone else. We start from so behind all the time, yet some make it, and that is extraordinary. But if we had the opportunity to really put them at the same place, you know, in the same opportunities, we see it when Latinas and Latinos get to college, right? Yeah. Once they're there, but to get to that place, they had to fight so much harder. They had to work so much harder. They had to do so much to overcome so many challenges. So if we as a community are able to put them in an equal place, we are going to be able to accelerate that American dream. And I think although there's not millions of us in places where we can make that happen, there are plenty of Latinos that can definitely make that a priority in their lives on how to accelerate, you know, the success of our community moving forward. And I'm hopeful. I see many of them. I see many organizations. So I think we're going to be able to get it done.
That's beautiful. I think half of it is actually believing in yourself or trusting your gut, like you said, and sort of introducing the idea of success, not believing the images we see of ourselves, but just understanding that we come from a long line of Latinas who have that hustle and we're ready to succeed by using what they taught us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know we're running out of time. So on that, my last thing, because I always, you know, when women say, particularly Latinas, like, well, I'm a Latina and, you know, I don't know, and I'm the only woman in the room and I'm the only person of color and I'm the only this, and they look at everything that they are as a negative, right? And I think that because going back to my previous venture, when I didn't even know what venture, I didn't know the data. I didn't know that I was only 0.5% potentially to be successful. So I think that helped me, because going into these boardrooms with all men, it was like a sea of sameness, identical men. And I would look at that, and instead of thinking, oh my God, I'm the only woman. Oh my God, I'm the only immigrant. Oh my God, I'm the only one with an accent. Oh my God, I'm the only Latin. I would immediately, I don't know where I got this, I would just feel so excited and empowered. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, there's nobody like me here, right? There's no one like me. There's no one that knows my community like me. There's no one that has a passion behind it. There's no one that knows the data. There's no one that's building a company like me. That, like, I would just get this rush of, I've got this, right? And I do think that changing that chip, it's a very subtle way of thinking, but it's a very powerful one. So for every Latina out there, like I say this all the time, being Latina is your superpower. Being different, being the only one, that's what you have going on for you. And you have to go into the world with that swagger and with that confidence, because the present is ours, the future is ours, and you have to know that, have that confidence, take up a lot of space in those rooms, be who you are, be loud, be passionate. And I can tell you, like, it works. So don't try to fit in, be you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Beatriz. I really appreciate having this talk with you, and just all your gems. You've had such a life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandra. It's so nice to meet you, and thank you, everybody, and go Latinas.
Thank you, everybody. Go Latinas.
Thank you so much, Beatriz and Sandra. So inspiring. I'm taken away with that commitment of leveling up Latinx. Thank you so much for representing that self-trust and that power. And yes, being Latina is a superpower, and being a Walker's Legacy woman is a superpower. So we are going to take a little bit of a break. We are going to connect with our DJ Celeste for a few minutes, take a little music break, let's get our dance on, and then we'll be back.